Hola, it's Joe Pardavila. Welcome back to Forbes Books, and I think I'm going to title this episode, How to Be a Successful Medical Entrepreneur. If you're a physician or other medical professional and you'd like to start a business to help secure your future by creating an alternative revenue source, then I've got the guy for you. Dr. John Shufeldt. He's a physician, serial entrepreneur, author, pilot, and attorney, and he's made it his mission to help healthcare professionals own their future. John, how are you?
Joe, if I was any better, I'd be a twin.
That's pretty impressive. Well, I guess I have to ask because, 2020 was quite a tough year to be in the medical profession. So if you don't mind sharing, what was it like being a doctor in the age of a pandemic?
Well, actually, it's kind of what we're supposed to be doing. I mean, I practice emergency medicine and I'm in a busy tertiary care center, level 1 trauma center in Phoenix, where, now the pandemic is running rampant through here. And it really has been, I guess, since probably April or May. But early on, it was, we kind of were caught with our head in the sand. I think I probably had the first coronavirus death in the hospital probably back in mid-February. And I'm not 100% sure the patient had coronavirus, but he acted just like a coronavirus patient and unfortunately died. It's a gentleman in his mid-30s.
Wow.
And that for me kind of kicked it off. And after that, it's been just high gear between the inner city hospital where I work and then also the tribal hospitals where I have a business where I work occasionally as well, but where we have a lot of emergency medicine physicians and nurses and techs who are literally deluged on a daily basis with coronavirus patients.
Wow. And it's funny, John, I lived in the New York metro area pretty much my entire life and moved down to Charleston, South Carolina a week before the pandemic. And I like to joke with people, there's no better time to make a major move in your life than during a global pandemic. But the one thing I kept hearing from people when I was down here in Charleston, South Carolina was, man, aren't you lucky that you got out of New York just in time? Because, as you know, the pandemic really blew up in New York in early, February and March. And it was funny that when people said that to me, I'm like, well, I guess I am fortunate, but this is not it. This is going to go across the country. Do you think people got caught flat-footed in like, oh, okay, this is going to be like a New York, LA problem. This isn't going to be a problem everywhere.
I think yes, I think people did get were caught flat-footed. First off, you see that, people generally know how congested China is and Wuhan was. And then I think, well, it's not going to be that bad here. But then they kind of forgot about New York. And then New York just gets crushed by it. And I still think people thought, well, we don't live in New York. I mean, look, they're living, their credible population density. It won't be that bad here. And then all of a sudden, well, actually, yes, it is. Maybe not as bad as New York, but it's pretty bad. And so I think we did get caught a little bit flat-footed just by, I think, the general optimism that most people have and the belief in our medical system.
And do you think it's just because it's such an incredibly infectious disease? In New York, you assume, as if you've been there and you've lived there, you're packed close to each other on trains, planes, and automobiles. Do you think people who lived in, I don't even want to say rural areas, but places that aren't as crowded, they're like, well, we're not as crowded here, so it won't be so bad. Is it just because it's such an incredibly infectious disease?
I think that's it. And, the disease has an infectivity rate that's pretty high. I remember reading, one person on average can infect 18 people.
Oh, geez.
And then people, when you're packed that densely, yeah, it's going to spread like wildfire. And, even in rural places, I was in Gallup, New Mexico, working with on one of the reservations in one of the IHS hospitals, and they were absolutely decimated. And you drive around New Mexico and, you drive for miles and not see a person. But the folks at this particular reservation and the Navajo reservation live in close proximity to each other. And their reservation just got crushed by coronavirus. I mean, just probably worse than any other reservation as far as I know.
I've heard the reservations got really, really just completely destroyed by this. And it's like you said, it's even though they're in the middle of nowhere, they're just packed tight in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's true. They live, they have multi-generational families all in the same dwelling space. And it just went through towns and, enclaves where they live. And also the care is, they're remote. So they have remote care. And when you're working at one of these IHS hospitals, people are incredibly well-meaning and certainly the patients are incredibly well-deserving. but it's often takes an hour or so to get into the hospital, and it can take twice as long to get out of the hospital if you have to transfer a patient someplace.
Hmm.
So it is really, and they've gotten hit very hard.
And John, one of the reasons I want to talk to you is because, your day job is day job and night job and overnight job. I'm sure is being a physician, but you have a passion for helping people in the medical profession in medical entrepreneurship. So I guess my first question about that is, how difficult is it to become a medical entrepreneur while you're dealing with such a global phenomenon like the coronavirus?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think there are many physicians after 2020 thought, we may want to have another arrow in our quiver. I have thought for years that emergency medicine was absolutely recession proof. I mean, good times, bad times, people are coming to the emergency department, which is generally true. What we all found out is it was not coronavirus proof. And there was a few months there where our ED volume went just basically got cut in half. People did not want to go to the emergency department for fear of getting infected themselves from other patients in the emergency department. So, there was ED groups all over the country laying people off, firing people just because of a lack of volume. Now, fortunately, we had kind of saw this coming, at least in our group in Phoenix, and did everything we could to prevent that. So we weathered the storm pretty well. But I think a lot of physicians now are thinking, I need to have something else I can fall back on. And maybe this entrepreneurism thing may be something I can do because I have a lot of good ideas. I'm just not sure where to go with them.
Now, I'm sure you've seen the data, John, but there's been extensive research on the fact that healthcare professionals lack significant training in the business field of healthcare. Why is that? Is it just because medical school is so hyper-focused in the actual practice of it that the entrepreneurial stuff sort of like slips by the wayside?
Well, I think, for many folks who went to medical school, their undergraduate life was filled with science. I mean, I was a sociology major, and I joked the only business class I took was typing in high school, and I almost flunked that. And so I did not have a business class before medical school, and I think I'm not alone. Most folks were science, biology, physics, chemistry majors, and that was all consuming. And medical school, was competitive when I went 30 years ago. I think it's more competitive now. And I always laugh and say, I could never get into medical school nowadays competing with these kids that I try to mentor because they're all rock stars. But none of them, generally speaking, have taken a business class. And so then you go through medical school where there is absolutely zero business training or training on how to run a practice or manage
Hold on a
people.
second. There's not like one class they have to take?
No, not on business. No, it's all science.
Wow.
And
That doesn't seem like it makes any sense.
it actually makes, in some respects, tremendous sense because medical school is the proverbial drinking from a fire hose. And you literally go, I can't believe I have to learn all this.
Okay.
And then at the end, you go, I can't believe I learned all this, and I hope I remember it. But it is just that the amount of knowledge that's jammed into your head in the first 2 years of medical school is, no pun intended, mind boggling.
Wow.
And I can't imagine taking a non-science class. Now, many medical schools offer dual degrees in an MBA and an MD, or an MD and a JD, but that's 1 to 3 additional years.
So, in other words, they're almost like doctors come out of like they've just been trapped in a forest for like 6 years, and then they're unleashed to the world, and they're like, okay, now make money. And I guess back in the olden times, it was you would either join a practice, work at a hospital, even start up your own. So, what kind of skills do they have when it comes to opening these businesses? Do they even know? Like when you started, John, did you even know how to open a practice or start your own business?
Not really. I mean, I started, I was in emergency medicine. So I went and worked in a hospital in the emergency department, and I was a hospital employee. And then went out to another hospital and became the emergency department medical director, but was a hospital employee. And then after about 6 months, the CEO came to me and said, look, we don't want to employ those ED doctors anymore. Why don't you just form a group and you employ them and take all the risk and have fun? And so I said, oh, of course, sure. So I started it. And, I literally, in 30 years, I can't imagine a mistake I have not made because I think I've made them all, some of them twice. So I realized and recognized very early, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I thought, all right, I better go back and figure this out. So I went back and got an MBA at Arizona State. And that was really incredibly eye-opening for me and a lot of fun. And so that's kind of the start of, how I started to gather, other than experiential, how I gathered some business knowledge.
And were you a practicing physician while you were pursuing your MBA?
Yeah, I try to go back to school every 10 years. And the great thing about emergency medicine is that, it's shift work. And I was doing the schedule. So it was relatively easy for me to say, all right, I know I'm going to be in school every Friday and Saturday. So I'm going to basically, for example, I go to school all day Saturday and then I'd work Saturday night in the emergency department, the one right next to the university. But I'd structure my schedule around my school commitments and classes and tests and what have you. So it wasn't really bad at all. And compared to medical school, the amount of information that you learn is a fraction of it. And I was older and more mature, if that's even imaginable. So it wasn't all that bad, and I really enjoyed it because I thought I've got to pick this stuff up or I am screwed.
And so, tell me about those years when you were pursuing your MBA. Was it almost like you got hit in the face with like a splash of cold water, where you're like, "Oh my God, I really needed this information."
Totally. I mean, it's just how to read a financial statement, cost accounting, all the soft things like marketing. This was in the early '90s, and it was right at the kind of start of email and online learning, which we didn't really do much of. So I'd sit in class for 8 to 10 hours a week, and then had all sorts of projects that you'd have to do and readings and papers that you'd have to write on top of that. But it was a cold water splash, and at the same time, I was starting an urgent care business called NextCare.
Oh, geez.
Uh,
You
So
had enough stuff to do, John? Jeez.
no, I was bored. And so it was perfect for that because I really had no idea how to open a business, and going back into my MBA really helped me. So I started NextCare the same year I started my MBA. So by the time I was done with my MBA, I had a modicum of knowledge about what the heck I was doing. Where before that, I was operating on instinct and gleaning whatever I could from whatever book I could find.
Incredible. And so now this has become a passion of yours in helping other physicians and medical professionals who want to start a business by creating, alternative revenue sources. So give me an example of how a doctor, physician, maybe anyone working in the medical field, how can they parlay their skills into being a medical entrepreneur?
Well, I think as a healthcare professional, not necessarily you have to be a physician for anything,
Right.
because there's a whole healthcare milieu of folks who are deeply ensconced in helping other people. I think we see things in our own profession and possibly in others where say, there's a better way to do this. There has to be a better way to do this. Or they come up with an idea, say, if only this could be this way. And they're like, well, gosh, I might as well just do it myself. And then they start this. And I've seen a number of physicians, surgeons, and pretty much everybody say, if only I had this particular instrument or this particular tool. And then they go out and develop it and invent it and patent it. And now they think, oh, gosh, now I don't know what to do with it. I've got to figure out a way to sell it. In general, we see a lot of things we think could probably help patients, improve our lives, improve the lives of others, and say, gosh, if I knew how to do this, this would be a great business model and it would help a lot of people. So that was kind of the genesis for starting this business.
And in other words, you wanted these medical professionals using their pre-existing skills and saying, whether you're an x-ray tech or, whether you're a nurse, I can use this set of skills here and I can make it into another business, right? Because it's not like you're telling these medical professionals to jump into, I don't know, become create an accounting software. You know what I mean? It's sort of still staying in your side of the swimming pool, so to speak.
Yeah, you could say it's. No, I opened up hot dog stands way back in the day, which was outside my lane, um, which was a lot of fun and a complete disaster, but it was a lot of fun. So I think most of the medical folks stay in their own lane. They stay in some sort of healthcare delivery model or healthcare device, but they can go outside of that. See a lot of physicians opening restaurants and clubs and different wellness activities. So I don't necessarily think they've got to stay in healthcare, but I think that's where most of us gravitate to. And the majority of my businesses have been healthcare related.
And could you give me an example of some of the businesses, professionals that you've been able to help and what they were trying to do?
Well, probably the easiest thing to do is just start with myself, since I've made, again, all the mistakes. I mean, some of the businesses I've started and operated and either closed or sold have been hugely varied. One was a private autopsy business where we go into mortuaries and do private autopsies on folks to let their families know how and why this person died.
Jeez.
if the coroner didn't want to do it. And that was actually a great business, and we really helped a lot of folks get some closure around their loved ones. Started a business called Slide Smart, where we sold medical images. We had about 10,000 medical images. This was before the days of Google. And we cataloged them online, and people could go online and order them, and we'd sell them and then send them either the digital image or a little 35 millimeter slide like you put in the old slide carousels, if you remember those things way back in the day.
Yeah.
We'd had a radiology interpretation company where we read x-rays and other images digitally and put reports online in real time and 10 to 12 minutes after the film was done. And that was a great business for us. I've had a number of different urgent care businesses along the way, franchised urgent care, bought an urgent care franchise, and then a number of different emergency medicine groups and some practice management groups.
And John, where did you get the entrepreneurial bones? Was that in your family, or was that just something that you're like, this sounds like something they could do. It's fun.
It certainly was not. So I'm adopted, and so it may be in my DNA, but it certainly was not in my upbringing. My parents were total old school. My father was an attorney, worked at the same law firm for 30 years. He did not have an entrepreneurial bone in his body, just zero. But I remember as a kid, I did what probably all kids do. I had a business shoveling snow, mowing lawns. I made candles, made homemade hard candy, sold racing forms and scratch sheets. So worked on a bee farm. So, I did all this stuff as a kid, and it just always struck me that I thought, oh, there must be a better way to do something. And then I think of a business idea around it and try to pursue it.
Wow, that's pretty awesome because it was sort of like steering me towards the question of like, sometimes like yourself, these medical people in the medical profession don't have the entrepreneurial bones. So do you need that? Is that something you can acquire? It sounds like you did.
I certainly grew up that way, and I can't say I had a mentor. I think that's just how I'm wired. But I don't necessarily think that's a prerequisite. I think if you're a healthcare provider and think, I've got this idea and I'd love to bounce it off somebody because I think it's going to make a difference in the world. And I always say, I want to change the world. And it could be my small little sliver of the world, but I want to change it. And even if you don't have the requisite entrepreneurial skill set, it can certainly be developed. Or you can certainly go out and hire folks who can actually manage and run and grow the business for you. And you just become basically a founder director of the business based upon the idea that you had, based upon your knowledge of working in the healthcare system. So I think just having the idea and taking that first step, whether it's doing it yourself or finding people that can help you do it, doesn't really matter. It's just taking the idea and saying, you know what, I think I have something here.
It's funny the way your career sort of has gone. You were there from the infancy of tech being introduced into the medical world and to all of us, obviously, but now biotech, and you see these huge companies investing in healthcare. Now, there's one thing to start your own practice, John, but another thing is to try to create an app or get into the biotech sphere. So is that something that you can help medical professionals out with? Because to some lay people, getting into that world, it's very complicated. You got VCs, you're looking for investors. So talk me through that.
It is a complex world, and that's kind of why I wrote the book. The book is the kind of A to Z of how to formulate an idea, how to bring it to market through what's called the minimum viable product, how to raise capital and where to find it, and then how to exit the business. And it's relatively high level, not quite 30,000 feet, but maybe 10,000 feet. But I spend a lot of my day talking to different mostly physician entrepreneurs, and coaching them through this process. And like I said, I've had a business where we went out and raised $50 million through private equity. I've sold a number of businesses. I'm going through another sale right now, and I learn something every time. And so, there are folks out there with a knowledge base who've gone before you. And I wish I had some of this knowledge, most of this knowledge, while I was going through it. And because I would have made far less mistakes.
And it's funny. You are certainly the definition of a serial entrepreneur. I think I'm not good at math, so I lost track at how many businesses you've named that you've started. What is it about starting a business? It seems like you gain so much joy from the actual starting of it. What is it to you?
It's the thrill of starting with nothing and turning it into something, and getting the joy and positive affirmation that, wow, this is really helping people. So, for example, I started this business, MeMD, virtual medicine, in 2010. And now, particularly with the pandemic, everybody knows about virtual medicine. It is just, it's kind of a Me Too thing now. But in 2010, I had a hard time convincing people that this was going to be the future. But I always knew this was going to be the future because when I would take care of people virtually, it was like I was Moses. I'd always make the joke I could save someone's life in the emergency department, and they'd be kind of like, "Well, yeah, that's what you're here for. What do you want? Thanks." But I'll tell you what, you treat a woman with a urinary tract infection at 3 a.m., you're like Moses. They are so incredibly thankful, and they literally go on and on and on about, wow, I just called this doctor up and got online with him, and he told me what was going on, and he prescribed this antibiotic, and by the next morning I was cured. And like, it's just a urinary tract infection. But to them, not having to leave their house to do this, it was cool. And so it's really that. It's like, God, I just literally made a difference. That was really cool.
Wow. And let's talk about telemedicine because, as we all know, it's been around, and I'm sure what keeps you up at night is like, damn, I was 10 years too early on that. But COVID was an accelerant for so many things. Accelerant on the work from home structure that people are living now. Talk to me about telemedicine and its future. Is it here to stay, but not at this rate? Or do you see it as sort of like most doctors now have to have some sort of form of telemedicine for them to operate a business?
Yeah, it literally went from, I remember literally going door to door. And when I say door to door, I mean urgent care to urgent care in 2010, 11. I'd say, look, because it was always one of the frustrations for me, particularly we had about 60 urgent cares. But in Phoenix or in Arizona, the urgent care market kind of dried up, no pun intended, in the summer because people left town. And so I'd always say, what am I paying you to do? Practice your golf swing? And they'd say, hey, you bring the patients in, we'll see them. I'm like, all right, game on. So I'd go to these urgent cares and say, look, if you do telemedicine, you can see patients all over your state. And in fact, if your physician there, the provider who's working has licenses in multiple states, you can see patients in multiple states and get your name out there. And to an urgent care owner, they'd say, well, yeah, but we don't want to cannibalize our business because, we're getting $100 when a patient comes in, but only whatever the number was at the time, $50 when we saw them virtually.
Right.
I said, well, that may happen occasionally, but you're going to expand your reach 100-fold, more than 100-fold, and no one would buy into it. And now it has to be a staple of someone's practice today if they are going to survive. And really where this is headed is much easier virtual connections, much more expansive network of physicians and wearable devices where you can literally plug in, go online, talk to a healthcare provider, whether it's behavioral health, like a psychiatrist, psychologist, or a medical physician, medical doctor, or an NP or PA, and you'll have your whole set of biophysical parameters. Your blood pressure, your pulse, your O2 sat, your blood sugar. The list is literally endless of what you could do virtually. And that is where it has to go, and that is where it's going.
You brought up something I was curious about. So, if you're a physician in Arizona, could you treat someone in Iowa via telemedicine? How does that work?
So, yes, if you're a physician in there, so I have about 30 state licenses. So I literally was treating patients. When I started this, it was only me and a few other people that I employed that were doing this. But we tried to have all 50 state licenses between us, and I had about 30 of them. And so I could treat patients anywhere in the country as long as I had a license from where they were domiciled. So if there was an Arizona patient who happened to be traveling to Maine, but they were from Arizona, no problem. If they were a Maine patient in Maine, I'd have to have a license for Maine to be able to treat them.
How difficult is that to get to be licensed? If say if you want to sort of, that's a medical entrepreneurial ship there. If you want to expand your reach and get licenses in multiple states.
It's more of a pain in the rear end than anything else. All states, it's a lot of work in the sense that
Okay.
all states have different requirements and different CME requirements. So it's a little bit onerous keeping that all up. There are state compacts now where if you're licensed in one state, it's much easier to get a license in another state. But back when I did it, it was 30 different state licenses that you had to apply 30 different states. So that got a little old, but it was necessary.
And I don't mean to open up all wounds, but how much does it suck now seeing telemedicine explode? And you're like, I could be like a billionaire right now if if I wasn't so early on this.
No, I'm glad I was early on it because we worked out the bugs for 7 years of this really. And when I started, one of the things I really wanted to focus on was behavioral health because I saw so many folks in the emergency department who had significant and serious mental illness and could not get the help they needed because there was not a lot of folks out there to help them, and B, there was a stigma attached. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if they could sit in their own home, talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist online, so they didn't have the stigma as, hey, I saw Shufeldt go into that guy's, into Dr. Smith's, the psychiatrist story,
Right.
that Shufeldt's crazy. And so a lot of folks did not get the mental health care they needed because of that stigma. So they just didn't do anything at all. And that was really the genesis of why I started it. It was way early for behavioral health. So I thought, well, I'll do what I know, and which is urgent care. So we started seeing urgent care patients via telemedicine in 2010.
And speaking of this, is something I'd love to ask you about because you mentioned you've been involved in urgent care businesses, but I feel maybe it's just me that all I see that's open now, that all new businesses are urgent cares or Starbucks. Talk to me about this proliferation of urgent cares all over the place.
Yeah. So you literally can't spit without hitting urgent care these
Yeah.
days. But when I started in '93, I don't know of any other urgent cares. I know there's one in Chicago because I worked there, but there were so few urgent cares in the country. I was one of the founders of this urgent care association, and literally this was probably 2000, and the whole industry just exploded to the point of now there are frankly too many urgent cares. And I thought I saw back in the probably 2005 to 8 range. I thought, this is gonna implode, and two, I think virtual care is gonna be the next horizon, which is why I started kind of conceptualizing how a virtual care model would work. Where the industry is going next, I think, is even more exciting, and that's using AI. So we've been working on program. I started working on AI in 2008, actually, but we started working on programs very early using AI. So when a patient goes on, they can put in their symptoms, put in how they're feeling. The provider sees that in the medical record, asks a few questions, and the AI suggests a treatment course that the provider has to sign off on. Yep, I think the AI is right, but it's all done for you in the chart using artificial intelligence. I about 2 years ago, I went back to MIT and got this AI certificate because was so convinced and remained that way that AI will really be a driving force in healthcare. In fact, I try to mentor a lot of medical students, and I caution many of them on going into things like radiology and pathology, because I think a lot of what that work is going to be will be taken over by AI, where the physician will sign off on the reading or the interpretation, but won't really be doing the reading or interpretation unless necessary.
Wow. Your credentials are so impressive. Could you paper the entire Chase field with all the certifications and accreditations you have? Because I've again lost track at how many of those you have.
It's here. Let me tell you a little story. So I like to be efficient, and I pride myself on being kind of hyper organized because I feel like I have to be. So I was on this trip, and I think I was doing consulting, and I came back, and I thought, crap, I've got to be in jury duty tomorrow. And so I usually get out of jury duty because for about 15 years I worked on the SWAT team, and I have a law degree, and they don't like those kind of people on juries for whatever reason. So I thought, well, but to get out of it, I have to go down there, and I don't have time to go down there because I think I was working a shift in the ED. So I get online and I fill out this form that you can delay jury duty. And then one of the questions said, "Are you in law enforcement?" And I put no. I thought, well, I submitted it, but then I thought, well, wait a minute. I guess I am in law enforcement because this physician medical director of the SWAT team, and it's an unpaid position, but I guess I'm still in law enforcement. Yeah. So I go back on, I fill it out again. I change it. I submit it again. And about a minute later, I get this email that says that you are no longer required to participate in the jury selection process because you have been deemed either incompetent or insane. And I looked at the thing and I thought, this is classic. So I called the number up and I'm talking to this lady and I said, hey, I filled out this form and I don't know what happened, but I got this thing that says I'm incompetent or insane. And she starts talking to me like this. No, it's okay. No, don't you worry about it. It's all right. And I'm going, I know, but I'm really not incompetent or insane. I'm serious. I'm really quite normal. No, it's okay. And so I always laugh when I think of that. And so I've gone back to school a lot, mainly because I've really needed to. I'm not all that quick or bright, so I'm thinking I better get the education. But I actually think for me, education, this lifelong learning process, has been, this sounds stupid, but life changing in the sense that it's kept me young, at least, or immature, and in the game. Like I have not felt burned out in emergency medicine after 30 years, which is probably a little unusual because it's a little bit of a burnout field. But I get to do enough different stuff and wear enough different sets of glasses and then have enough different fields of view that when I'm working in the emergency department tomorrow and I'm kind of excited about it because I get to go work in the emergency department. And I only do it, probably 8 or 10 times a month now. So I'm kind of jazzed up about going back and doing something I've done for 30 years. So all these other things that I've done in education that I've been, fortunate enough and blessed enough to undertake has really kept me in the thing I should be doing because this is what I was born to do, which is taking care of people.
His name is Dr. John Shufeldt. His upcoming book, Entrepreneur RX, arrives in stores in April. John, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, pleasure is mine. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
And that's it for this edition of Forbes Books, available for you to listen to and subscribe to on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.